Hey guys, it's Liv here. Today we're going to be going over how to draft in an UBERS draft league. Now, I feel like that there's a lot of things that are different when it comes to UBERS draft versus standard draft, which is why I have decided that today we're going to break down the teams for another league called the Pokemon Generations League. Now, their commissioner, or I believe someone high up in the league, reached out to me by the name of Meme, asking me to do power rankings for the league, and I feel like this would be a good opportunity to break down what does and doesn't work in an UBERS draft league, because a lot of these teams, I think that if it was just like pretty as proportionally close to a non-UBERS draft as it could be, because obviously you can't really find a good replacement for like a Zekrom, for example, that just doesn't exist. However, if it was as close to an UBERS or to a non-UBERS draft league as it could be, I think a lot of these teams would be pretty fine, to be honest. However, there is stuff that definitely translates differently to UBERS, and I felt like that by doing these PRs, I could break down what does and doesn't work, maybe some stuff that coaches might have overlooked in their drafts, and just stuff like that. So if you guys do enjoy this video, of course, leave a like down below, comment, subscribe if you're new. We're on the road to 250. We're actually almost there. We're at like 230. 234 is recording. I'm actually recording a day in advance for once. But with that said, though, I'm going to be going over all the teams. I'm going to probably spend a couple minutes on each team. I did try and as scientifically break this down as possible. Now, obviously, power rankings will always have some sort of opinion in them. That's just how they are. It's what happens when you do a power rankings video. However, I tried to have some sort of basis behind how I rank these teams. So what I did was I broke these teams out of 20 points into categories that I personally decided to tier. I gave 2 points for removal. Basically how I did removal is if you had 2 solid removal options, I gave you 2 points. If you had multiple removal options but they just weren't viable, but like you had one viable one, I gave 1 point. If you just had like 1 or 0 removal options and they just were unviable, or just like no rockers or spikes or something like that, basically no damaging hazards, I gave a 0. For setters, for removal options, that was for setters, my bad, I mixed it up. But for removal options, basically what I did was if you just had 2 good removal options or 2 things that would click removal at all, gave it 2. If it was just 1 thing that would click it, or even just like a couple options that like might click it like in one matchup ever, I give it a 1, and if it just had no removal options, I give it a 0. Clerics, it was if you had one, it was a point. If you didn't have one, it was a 0, or at least a usable one, I should say. There were a couple teams that had like unusable clerics, and I'll get into that in a bit. No big weaknesses. If a team had 4 weaknesses in a type, or 3 weaknesses in a type, and a 4 times weakness in a type, or something of the sort that broke down to 4, I took a point off per type. Also, if a team was missing a key type, which there were a few that were missing very key types, I took off a point, or even 2 points, depending on what the type was and how much it affected their team. Strong breakers, I give 1 point if the team had some strong physical options and 1 point if the team had some strong special options. The team could have like 5 insanely top tier special options, like let's say Kyurem White, Spectrier, etc. Like Kyurem White, Spectrier, I'm trying to think. It'll be easier to physical. Let's say a team has like Zekrom, like Cinderace, actually, you know what? I'll just go over it when we get into the team, because there are a couple teams that this works a lot better than me just naming options. Strong cleaners, again, I broke this down pretty similarly. However, I did it 1, which is a natural cleaner that could be above like 110 speed, and 1 cleaner that could function really well as a Scarf or priority option. If the team had it, gave it 2. If it only had 1, I gave it 1, and if I had 0, there were no teams that had 0. Same as for breakers. All the teams had at least 1 option. On predictability, I tiered this basically on how I felt like, based on my experience in seeing UBERS players draft teams, how certain mods I felt like became predictable or not predictable. So this is the most subjective category. This is the most opinion based by far, but I felt it was really easy to fall into a predictable loop. I gave it a low score. This was out of 5 because I felt like this was actually the most important one in my opinion. We did good momentum. If a team had good momentum, it got a 2. If it had like passable momentum, it got a 1. If it had none, it had 0. There was literally, I think, like 1 or none usable. It would need to have like literally 1 to 0 options basically that would ever click it to have a 0. Better options left. If a team could make free agents and should make free agents, I give it a 0. If it's fine as it is, I give it a 1. Standout was also the other opinion-based category. I basically just tiered it on if I liked the team or not. So again, that was a very opinion-based category. But with that said, I've explained how I broke these teams down. I think it was a very important way to score them, because otherwise it just comes into me tiering a bunch of drafts of players who I don't know anything about. I don't know their skill. I don't know how they play. I don't know anything. So it just became a huge mess to do it any other way. So with that said, though, let's get into number 16. Now, number 16, we have the Twin Leaf Turtwigs. So the Twin Leaf Turtwigs draft is Cinderace, Dragovish, Hippowdon, Cobalion, Araquanid, Cloyster, Venusaur, Ninetales, Shuckle, and Liepard. So I think right off the bat, what I will say this team does really well is they have really strong physical breakers. As I said when we got into the draft, it became very apparent. Cinderace, Dragovish, are two of the strongest physical breakers just on the board. There are not many physical breakers, especially in UBERS as a whole, that are viable, and I think that these two are already two standout picks. So already this team did something very right in picking physical breakers. These are really, really strong options. I think this team did phenomenal at that. Not only that, but I love the sand option. I think this is one of the things I like the most about the draft, is the fact that they chose sand with Dracovish and then had Cinderace to clear grasses. I thought that was already phenomenal. What I will say though is everything beyond that I think really goes downhill. I will give credit where it's due. I actually love Shuckle on this team a lot. I think Shuckle is a very strong option in UBERS, and I think it also gives the non-sand route to Dracovish, so I do like that a ton. However, you do not need two web setters in this team, especially when those web setters are Araquanid and Shuckle. In my opinion, if this was a non-standard league, I would have went with Araquanid here. However, in a non-UBERS league, I would have went with Araquanid. However, in UBERS, I think Shuckle is really nice in this team, especially as a backup rocker. However, Araquanid is still very good. I would drop one of them though. I gave this team actually a 1.5 in hazards, because if you look at the team, there's a ton of hazard options. However, there are not a lot of viable hazard options, especially not mods that should viably be staying in this draft. As I mentioned, the Araquanid Shuckle double up, as well as Cobalion can run hazards. I don't think it really runs hazards that well in this format. I think that Cloyster is a very wasteful pick on this team, despite providing like half the hazard support. So I give this team like a 1.5 in hazards. Has literally no removal outside of Cloyster. But I don't think Cloyster should be staying on the team anyway. So I give it nothing for there. No Cleric. As I said, no strong special breaker. The cleaners are really good on this team, actually. I think this team has a ton of good cleaning options. Venusaur is a great cleaner. Cinderace is a great cleaner. Dracovish can clean for sure under sand at least. Cloyster could even clean, so I at least gave credit where it's due there. Cloyster does provide actual cleaning support this team if it was to stay on the team. This is going to be a very predictable team in my opinion. If we look at this team is basically running Cinderace, a weather of the matchup. It'll be running probably webs in almost every matchup, to be completely honest. I don't see any other reason to draft two web setters. Some sort of hazards, and then X filler. I think it's just generally a very weak team in that regard. Now, I will say that the team does have a win, so shout out to that. I think the team can still definitely pull wins. It's just a matter of, I think that personally, just on paper, this team, as of right now, doesn't really impress me that much. I did mention as well in, that I would 100% be dropping Araquanid, Cloyster, Venusaur, Ninetales, and Liepard for a Fairy type, which this team misses, which especially in this format, that's a death sentence, and it will become very apparent as the season goes on, in my opinion. I would also get a Flying type, because especially for a team that is setting sand, if someone was to pick up Excadrill, which they're very lucky no one has it, for a team that's setting sand, that would basically be a death sentence against this team, especially with no ground resist at all. There's flat out zero ground resist in this team. So I think a Flying type and also a grass that would actually resist ground types would be huge in this team. There will be a lot of matchups later on, stuff like Zyger Complete, for example. They will absolutely destroy this team. This team has no counterplay to a really Fizz-Def ground, in my opinion. Absolutely no mons in the team. I guess Venusaur will be like the best check, but it will become very apparent in certain matchups where this team will and will not work. I would also get a better Dark type than Liepard. I just don't think it's a viable Dark, especially just on this team. It's really not going to ever do much. However, I will say for 20 points, it wasn't a bad option. I just think that there were better Darks left. And then also I would get a different Spiker that isn't Cloyster. I know there were Spikers left. To be fair, there weren't the best Spikers left. But I feel like that even just like a 20-point Spiker, you probably get something like a Whirlpeed even that would probably provide better Spike support, or at least more usability in this team than Cloyster. And it's not to say that Cloyster's a bad mon. However, when you bring Cloyster, Araquanid, Dracovish, or even just 2 of the 3 to a matchup, it becomes very easy to just start whittling down a team with just a key mon or 2. So I do think this team definitely does have some merits. I think that it's very strong physically, and that's very hard to actually come by in UBERS, so I will give it a ton of props for that. However, I do think this team will, as the weeks go on, become very apparent why I do have it at 16th. So if we go to the number 15th team, that goes to the Booming Bathgate Blacephalons. I will say that is a tongue twister and a half if I've ever seen one myself. This team does, in my opinion, have some really standout features to it. The team consists of Palkia, Zygarde, Glastrier, Galvantula, Klefki, Moltres, Galar, Passimian, Runerigus, Eldegoss, and Magmortar. So this is one of those teams where I mentioned it has a Cleric option, but it's not a viable one. I do not count Eldegoss as a Cleric at all. I do not count it as a Pokemon at all, to be completely honest. I think at 60 points it was severely over-tiered. Should have probably been 40, maybe even 20, to be honest. I think Eldegoss is awful. With that said as well, I will give credit where it's due. For a Dual Dragon team, well, I don't rate Dual Dragon, especially not in this format, and especially not when your Fairy and your Steel are Klefki. I will say that this actually is a pretty solid Dual Dragon pair because of the fact that Palkia is at least not adding to the Ice weakness. So I'll give credit where it's due. Also the fact that Palkia is a very strong special option and Zygarde is a very strong physical one. This is definitely solid. The breakers on this team are actually phenomenal. I think his team personally is some of the better breakers just in the league in terms of like a really well-rounded set of breaking. Glacier can obviously break really well for Zygarde and Palkia, clearing through grass types, which is huge. Galar Moltres as well could be a really solid cleaner on this team. I think as well, Galar Moltres actually be a fairly just diverse option on this team. I do think, however, this team is going to fall in a really bad predictability pit, even though I think that some of the mods can run multiple options. I think Palkia isn't the most diverse Uber, though I will say that it can be diverse. I just think it, on average, is not a really diverse Uber. Zygarde is not the most diverse, especially in this sort of format. However, again, it's a strong pick, to say the least. Glastrier, I think as well, isn't exactly the most diverse option, though again, it's a very good mod in certain matchups. Galvantula is pretty easy to tell what it's going to do, especially in UBERS. Klefki, it's pretty easy to tell what it's going to do, and it's going to be a very pivotal mod on this team. It's going to make or break pretty much every matchup that I could imagine, in my opinion. Eldegoss and Magmortar aren't coming. Get better options. I promise there are better options. Brunorigus, I think, is actually kind of cool on this team. It's a nice backup ground for Zygarde. I love having backup grounds for Zygarde. However, I would have probably went with Palisand and then just gotten better hazard options. Regardless, though, it's definitely not a bad option. I don't even know if Palisand is around. However, we'll have to actually see. Is Palisand around? Because if Palisand is around, I think that would personally be what I would free agent for. Yes, Palisand is actually around. I would 100% free agent for that. Having a Spinef ground with Zygarde is huge in my opinion, and especially because that typing still does work really well for this team. I think it fits really well. So I would definitely drop Brunorigus for that, and then just drop Eldegoss for a better grass. I'm pretty sure, I'm almost certain Tangela was around, if I'm not mistaken. Let me actually see. Tangela, okay, Tangela was actually taken. However, there are still, I'm certain, better grasses in any regard than Eldegoss, especially in that point total even. I'm looking through, it's actually not. But even then, like in the 40 points, there's Blossom, and I think Blossom's actually a good pick. I almost have gotten beaten myself in Ubers by Blossom. So I've also used Blossom. I think it's actually a cool pick. It's better than Eldegoss, even just on the same point tier, let alone for cheaper. And you could then bump up Magmortar or something. I do actually like Passimi on this team. I think it's not an awful option. However, I would say that you could probably work in a better Uber here, at least for the typing. For example, Lugia could be a really cool Uber here if you want like a semi-style route, though you would definitely need a bit of reshaping of the whole draft. Also, Genesect could actually be a cool Uber. Now, I wouldn't normally rate Genesect in Ubers as a sole Uber. However, I do think actually this team could really support it well if you did a bit of tweaking. I do think the Palkia certainly works. However, the one that I would give the most credit to would be Solgaleo. I think for a team without a Psychic and with the Steel being the only option as Klefki, Solgaleo felt like a really, really free option here. And I think that while this team doesn't currently support it the best, it would be pretty easy, in my opinion, to shape a team where Solgaleo could actually really shine. So I would definitely look into something like that. With that said, though, let's get into the number 14 team. So number 14 team is the Cyanwood Shuckles. So from here, we actually get a decent jump in quality of team. And personally, this would honestly be one of my favorite teams, if not for one reason. Well, actually for two reasons. There are two really big reasons why. The first reason being there's no ground type. And normally, I think that while that would be like a pain, you could normally work around it. However, the options as resistor ground types are Jolteon and Shiinotic. Oh no, what are you doing, Sid? Why? Why? That's so bad. Oh my god, you're so lucky that no one drafted like a really threatening electric, because there's still stuff like Zapdos, Zero, Aura, there's still stuff like Zekrom left on the board. There's so many good electrics, so I think you really, really lucked out there, I will say. As you can see, 3 of the best electrics all just went undrafted. So I find that really funny. Coco at least went, so there's at least some really threatening ground, but electric. But to be fair, this team can actually kind of handle Coco to a certain extent. With stuff like Jolteon, you definitely muscle pass, like a Wish Toxic. On top of also the fact that we thought I could probably do a ton with Priority Ice Shard at least. So it wouldn't be impossible, but the Coco matchup will definitely be rough to say the least. And even if we look lower, stuff like, again, Dragozolt went just undrafted outright. There are teams that I did recommend that to, though. Raikou at least went drafted. So there are some, but like a lot of really good electrics just didn't go drafted. So I think this team definitely did really luck out there. Though I still think it's a very bad weakness to have, especially when your Uber's a Ho-Oh. I think it's a very bad weakness to have. As well as the fact that this team has no rocks, or spikes, or T-spikes. The only hazards come from one Pokemon, and it's this Slurp buff. I think it is also a huge detriment to this team. Though I will say this team actually does like webs a lot. So the Ho-Oh can actually be really threatening offensively on webs. However, you're never pressuring anyone with hazards, so you're going to always be the one defogging. So I think as well, for the team to only have Ho-Oh as a removal option, that really kills it. And truthfully, if it wasn't for the other two teams missing such key components, and the fact that this team does still have some really solid synergy, for example, Buzzwole and Ho, I think are phenomenal together, especially with Melmetal in tandem with that. Really, really solid fat. Primarina as a breaker with Melmetal is really, really just diverse in what it breaks, and Weavile is really solid on this team as well. I think this team in the top 5 picks is phenomenal. I think when you get lower than that, it really, really tanks in quality though. I would literally drop all 5 of those bottom 5 and get just fix the team. Get some better hazards, get a ground type. There's Crook right there if you want to drop Weavile. You could probably keep like Jolteon, I guess. It's not the worst pick in the world. You could drop like Weavile even for like a Crocodile, and that would fix so many issues for this team. I promise it would literally fix a high majority of these issues. I think in general though, like there's really no excuse to not make free agents with this team. Though it's definitely usable. I will say though that there are certainly things that need to be fixed about this team in my opinion. With that said though, let's get into number 14. And now number 14 we have the Belligerent Blazikens. I think from here on out we actually notice a decent quality shift in teams, I will say. Just compared to the bottom 3. These next few were really, really hard to rank, to rank in general. From here all the way through our number 8 team, I believe it is, we're all really hard to rank. And now I will say this team actually has a lot going for it. I like Blaziken a lot. I think it's actually really slept on Uber. I think G-Darm with Blaziken is actually not the worst pick in the world. Though I will say it's kind of unnecessary, though G-Darm at least does provide something, being the fact that it can kill flying types, which is not bad. However, I personally would drop it. I think that as maybe controversial as that might be, I would drop it, and I would actually look into sand on this team. Biggest reason being, this team actually has the foundations for a really solid sand team. Grass type being Tangrowth, not being reliant on recovery through synthesis is huge. Finny as well is a really cool sand partner in my opinion. Blaziken as well would be really, really good for an Excadrill sand team, and if you really want to, you could maybe even make Excadrill plus Dracozolt work. I did try and map out some plans, however, I ultimately decided that it would take way too long to really, truly make a good, like, presentable free agent option. However, I think you could certainly make an Excadrill or Dracozolt or both sand team work really well for this team, and it would provide a ton of support. For example, Dracozolt will provide sort and clearing water types for Blaziken. Excadrill will be great on this team as well for just clearing through any sort of flying types, because you could obviously run Rock Slide and outpace pretty much any bird. I will say this team also has some really, really good removal options. Stuff like Finny, for example, is phenomenal. Xatu is really good at pressuring hazards. The setters are okay. Lycanrock's a good one, but like Meteg is never running hazards. This team is basically just depending on Lycanrock, Dusk as the setter, which is another reason I think it's Sand can benefit, because if you run something like Drill, in certain matchups, Drill can actually be a really good rock setter. Gigalith or Hippopotas even could be a really strong rock setter. Even T-Tar, if you want, it could be a really strong rocker. So I do think this team has the makings of a really strong team, actually. It's just at the current moment, I don't see it. The momentum is really good though, however. Options like Darm and Blaziken will be terrifying momentum-wise. Also Flygon and Xatu, and even more Pekko can be really good. Tangrowth as well, while not providing momentum, at least does benefit from it. So I do think this team actually is really solid momentum-wise. This team, I think, could easily, with free agents, become one of the top, like, 3-4 teams. It's just currently not there for me yet. Definitely, though, a team to keep an eye on. I think this team could certainly perform really well this season. Next up, at the number 12 slot, we're going to go into the Boston Blasters. A lot of these teams have been really BC alphabet. Now, this team actually, I think, has a lot going for it as well. The team is Lando I with Sheer Force, Kyurem, Spectrier, Thundurus, Pex, Bronzong, Hitmonchan, Sandslash, Scyther, and Tauros. And in terms of special offense, this is one of those teams where, as I mentioned, the special breakers are phenomenal. This team has some of, in my opinion, this team is the best special breakers of any draft in the league. Not necessarily because they have like the best special breaker of any pool, but just as a whole, there should be no special wall that should really like there should be nothing that could really like truly pressure the specially, which I think almost actually provides into some of the merit for the special breakers to work physically. Stuff like Kyurem, Lando, and Thundy could all have physical options. It's just none of them really want to. But nonetheless, though, this does have some really solid breakers, especially. I will say though that one area that this has a huge weakness in, Elephant in the Room, this doesn't have a fairy type, which I think is a pretty big deal because of the fact that this is such a dragon heavy format. Now, I will say that, to be fair, to the credit of this team, there was another fairy team that had a lot weaker of a steel, so I do think that this at least does provide to it. However, that team at least was a lot more solid overall. I think as well, this team could certainly benefit from having just in general more diverse breakers. As I said, a good physical breaker could be huge. This will probably fall into a predictability pit of where Thundy is actually going to need to be the physical breaker of the team, if not Lando or Kira, which I think will certainly hurt diversibility or even just potential options that those Pokemon would have. On top of this as well, I think this team could have certainly gotten some better momentum options. Thundy and Lando are really cool. However, that's really where it ends. Scyther is actually not bad as well, but it's probably not going to be the sort of threat you think it will be in this format. In general, I think this team has a lot of potential. However, I don't see it yet. Hazards are really cool though. Bronzing is great. Sandslash is great, especially with Spikes. This gen I think is actually a very viable option. Really cool backup ground as well to Lando. The team as well definitely has a lot of potential. I don't see it yet. With this said, we're gonna go into the number 10 slot, I believe. Yeah, number 10 slot being the Smyrna Quagsires. So the Smyrna Quagsires actually also have a lot going for them, and this is definitely a really, really standout team for a few reasons. However, I think that there are certainly some things that I just cannot overlook. The removal is phenomenal. This team, Lando Togekiss is great. I think that alone, like, Lando can definitely be in this format a really good defensive option, in my opinion, especially as a check to certain physical threats. And it can definitely run Defog more affordably because it will still pressure a lot of options. Togekiss, though, is phenomenal. Togekiss can basically carry a team with Defog on its own, so the fact that it has a usable option as a backup, I think speaks for itself. The Hazard setters aren't the best, though. Lando is a good setter. It's a phenomenal setter. The only other setter, though, on this team, if I am not mistaken, would be not Quagsire. I don't know why I was thinking Quagsire. The only other option for hazards would be Coffagrigus. So that definitely does hurt. However, Lando is such a good hazard setter, it doesn't make it like a horrible hazard team. Clerics, it does have Togekiss. That's actually a really good cleric. No big weaknesses. This definitely does have some decent weaknesses, to say the least. For example, the fact that it doesn't have a good Psychic Resist will definitely hurt. Now, it does have options on Psychics, to be fair, but no Dark type on this team definitely does suck when the resists are Oranguru and Berserker, to say the least. That is going to be very notable. On top of the fact that as well, the only other really good array around Psychic is Coffagrigus. So it'll become very apparent very quickly the second this team fights a really good Psychic type. This team is not going to go far this season in terms of like good Psychic matchups. And there were definitely some threatening ones. For example, if we look at the board, Lunala was taken. I'm sorry Dongus didn't go. Dongus is a very good one. But Lunala being taken already should have sort of spoken to the fact that this team really does need a good one. The Oranguru, I guess, could maybe, if the matchup is good, help with that. Even when we look in the non-UBERS pool, for example, we have options like Lele going, for example, which, to be fair, Dark wouldn't really help with that, but a better Steel could. Mew would be a great one, though, again, Mew does have good coverage at least, so those two are sort of outliers. They can get around checks really easily. If we look at lower tier options, though, of course, we get into options such as Slowking could actually be an option that could pressure this team pretty well. Outside of Rillaboom, this team could definitely get pressured really easily by it with just Psychic plus Water. Otherwise, I mean, it won't be like a threat or anything, but it will definitely at least be an annoying one, to say the least. Metagross, again, similar options, especially the fact that it could check here in White could be really huge for this team, like in terms of something a Dark type can help a lot with. Slowbro, again, similar to Slowking, just I think that Slowbro is handled arguably a lot better. Just because Slowking could handle Kyurem White at least a bit better. I guess not as many good Psychic Swim as I thought did, but I still do think nonetheless that a good Dark could definitely help this team a lot, or at the very least a better Psychic Resist if you're not going to get a Dark than Oranguru and Berserker. With that said as well, the only other areas I think this team really did struggle in is just the fact that I think this will definitely fall into a predictability loop. I think that overall, a lot of these monsters are going to be really gunning to break, and I don't think this team really has the best switch-ins to stuff, at least when you really break down particular matchups. So what I mean by that is, while I think the Snorlax Cauliflag can definitely be switch-ins to stuff, there will definitely be certain really threatening Ubers. For example, Ground on this team doesn't really have the best Ground switch-ins because the Fire Ground will definitely destroy this team pretty easily, especially when you take in the fact that Quagsire is not going to switch in well because of Solar Beam. When you also take into stuff like Kyurem Black, for example, can certainly pressure this team. Outside of Quagsire, again, Quagsire is arguably going to be really stitching this team together defensively, to be honest. But Kyurem Black can definitely pressure this team really well, especially at +1. Lunala, as I mentioned, already destroys this team. Oranguru is literally the best and probably only check to it. But it will still find a way. Trust me, Lunala will always find a way. Magearna will certainly pressure this team. I will say, though, that Lando can definitely get around it. But again, Magearna can certainly set up and run like Shucker Berry and maybe lower it. And then at that point, it's destroyed. Marshadow, not a lot of teams handle Marshadow, but this team is especially really weak to Marshadow. Just in general, as I mentioned, a lot of these really threatening Ubers, even something like Xerneas, for example, and Zyre Complete will pose a ton of threats. To be fair, less so Zyre Complete because Kyurem White. That's actually a really phenomenal check and probably one of the best options around it. just offensively at least. However, Xerneas will certainly also pressure this team because there's really no good farriers just outside of Berserker. So I do think this, in terms of matchup perspective, we'll certainly have a lot of UBERS picks that it really struggles against. However, I think the synergy is actually not the worst. I think it's definitely a really good team on paper, at least in terms of the foundation it sets. It could definitely be better though. In terms of our number 9 slot, we go into the Iron City Ferrothorns. And I think this team actually, again, it has a lot going for it. And truthfully, if it wasn't for one thing on this team, I would actually probably put this team significantly higher. Now, one thing, sadly, I can't show the full team, which is kind of annoying. However, last mod is Roselia. The full team is Kieran Black, Heatran, Slowbro, Thunderous, Weezing Galar, Vanillix, Arctozolt, Licky, Polyearth, and Roselia. Now, if you've ever played in UBERS League, I think you could pretty easily say where I'm going to go with this. But drop the Hail. Hail is offering you nothing on this team. I promise you, it's offering you nothing. There's no argument you can make to keep Hail. If you are, it's because you want to use it, not because you need it. I don't think you need Veil on this team either. The only one it's providing for is Kieran Black, and I don't think Veil is good at all in UBERS. Now, I will say that I will go back to this in our later picks, because there is a team actually that is really high up that I did rate, and Veil actually provides a lot for it. However, as a general, you need to really dedicate a team to really benefiting from Hail, and it also at the same time as dedicating to it needs to be a really good backup option. And this team, I think, it's such a wasteful mod. Vanillix provides nothing for it, especially when the fact that the ice type can actually handle waters, it really provides nothing for it. It's not even good for like a free shot option. So drop the Hail. I promise you can get a lot better options, especially when this team lacks a ground and a dark type. Literally drop Arctozolt, Vanillix for Crocodile, and then just get something else. Literally anything else with the points. I promise you it fixes, like, a majority of your issues. The team would become broken with it. With that said, otherwise, I do think overall this team is actually a really strong team. Just literally drop the Hail for Crook and then something else. This team becomes a top 5 team pretty instantly once you do it. This team doesn't even really have that big weaknesses outside of that. Even Polyearth is arguably an okay option on this team, especially as a water switch-in, which could help with, like, Heatran potentially, though I think it is a bit wasteful as well. I'd probably drop that plus Hail, and then just get, like, maybe a better fighting type. There are definitely some better fighting types you can get. There were a lot of strong ones on the board, if I remember correctly, especially in the low tiers. Maybe I'm misremembering. If there weren't, it's not an awful option. I could definitely see at least where it could maybe do something. But again, at least drop the Hail. For fuck's sake, just drop the Hail. Overall, this is a really scary team, actually. I think this team, on paper, could be really terrifying. It just literally pick up Crook. It fixes almost all the issues in this team. Next up, we're going to get into the number 8 slot. And, yeah, that would be... Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4... Actually, this is the number 9 slot. The last team was number 10. If I said number 9, my bad. The next team on the list, however, is the Huddersfield Heracrosses. The Huddersfield Heracross. This team actually, I think, truthfully, could have also, again, been a really, really top-tier team. There are a couple things that really shy me away from it, and they're truthfully mostly personal things. The removal on this team is okay. It doesn't really need great removal, though, truth be told, because a lot of teams isn't really hazard weak. And Golbat is such a good removal option in matchups that it needs it in. This is not the biggest deal in the world. Hazard options are really good in this team. For a team where the ground type doesn't set hazards, Clefable, Copper Jaw, and even Marax can definitely be good hazard setters. This is arguably, I think, as well, the only draft that I've seen Clefable provide anything to. However, I still don't like Clefable on this team at all. I don't like Clefable, in fact, in this format at all. I should specify that. It actually fits synergy-wise pretty well. And truth be told, if there was any team to draft it, I think this one makes the biggest case for it. But I promise you, if you drop Clefable for Sylveon and just get another rocker, this team will fix itself. This will go literally... This, personally, I think would have probably been my favorite team if it had Sylveon over Clef. And it is available. I did double-check that. Clefable, in my opinion, if you run Calyx versus any special Dragon type in this format, you'll notice really quickly why Clefable will not hold up. In my opinion, Unaware Clef doesn't provide much, and the fact that Clef is such piss-poor bulk in comparison to other fairies, you really want something in terms of a special option that's going to take hits. Like the 115 mark or above, in my opinion, for Wells is really a vital speed tier to hit. And Sylveon as well, with Zyger Complete, is a destructive core. I'm personally using it, and I can speak for the volumes. I can speak volumes of how good it is and how annoying it is to break. Trust me when I say that you will fix your team doing this. Otherwise, there's not really a lot to say. You can probably bump up Bolton to that point, or like get a actual Psychic type in this team. I think that could be really cool. Like even just a Duosion over something like Maractus at that point could be really cool. Point is, though, is I think you definitely have some free agents that can work. However, this team is certainly not bad. I think it's actually a pretty solid team for what it is. It's just that I personally would never use Clef in this format. I think it's a death sentence. Now, Bash has been doing a really good job in BBL Showdown and proved me wrong with that, I will say. But I still think it's a death sentence in this format. Now we're going to get into the number 18. We're in the top half now. We're at the Team Plasma Magna Zones, coached by Meme himself, the commissioner. Now, I will say this team definitely does have some things that I am strongly against on it. However, I think it's actually, for a lot of the mods drafted, it has a lot of unconventional picks that I think actually work really well here. For example, Volcania and Celebi, as a core, and just on this team, I think is phenomenal. I love it, especially with Torn and Komo. I think these four really support themselves really well. It's sort of like a budget OU team, and I think it provides really well, especially in tandem with Mag. These five speak for themselves. I think they're going to actually synergize really well, and I love them together. I think as just in general, this format, they'll be great. As well as we also see Pylon here. I love Pylon in this format. It's a great ground that can also actually be really solid check to dragons, especially when the fairy is Mag, because a lot of dragons do get ground coverage. Stuff like Zygardes, of course, for example. Even just options like Reshiram can definitely check Mag, to say the least. However, Magiran is still a phenomenal fairy, and I still stand by the fact that it's a deadly fairy in this format. I also love the fact that they have the budget fairy pick. I think it's pretty cool in this team. It's actually a really cool mod in this team, and it provides a lot, such as a backup rocker, a cool TO support, just the fact that it's just a backup fairy if needed. A cool cleric option as well, so Mag doesn't need to run aromatherapy. It's a or I guess heal ball. I'm pretty sure it only gets heal ball. But the point is, though, it is a cool option. I will say, though, there are a couple of things that should be dropped. The first one being Greedent. I know it's not the same point exchange. Get Munchlax. You're gonna love it. I promise you. Get Munchlax. Even if you have to drop Raichu for like some sort of electric that's 20 points, I promise you, whatever you drop it for, whatever you drop anything else for to get Greedent, we'll make it, to get Munchlax over Greedent will be worth it. Even if you have to drop like Clefairy for something else, I think it will be worth it. With that said, there aren't a lot of things I actually really dislike about this team. The removal could be a bit better. It's really just Torn as viable removal. I don't rate Volcanium's removal, but it is still an option nonetheless with boots, at least this gen. So, yeah, I love Torn as removal, though. It's phenomenal. I almost gave the team a 2 just for Torn removal, truth be told. But I think that I kind of wanted to not outright invalidate my own system for it. There was a bit of weakness overlapping, but really nothing like that I think is going to truly make or break this team, in my opinion. Really, the only types that I think really actually pressure the team at all is ground. But again, Celebi plus Torn should really destroy grounds anyway. And then also offensively, Volcanion can still pressure grounds even though it's weak to it. So I don't think this team is really going to be threatened too much. Mag as well with Shaka can definitely lure a lot of grounds. So again, it's not a huge deal. The team is very diverse actually. For a team with a lot of really like on paper, like you sort of know what it could do in a matchup, I think it has a lot of options it can do. So we'll never really fall into the rut of this mod is running X set every week or Y set every week. And if it does, I think it'd be pretty hard to pull off. The momentum's okay. I think that that Mag, Torn are really the only options that actually really Torn is the only one that truly wants to run it every week. I sort of like Raichu, but Raichu is such an unbring, and I don't think it really counts. At least not in this format. I think it's such a piss poor option. Mag is definitely a cool option for momentum. However, you don't really want to bank on it. Same as Celebi. So I think the momentum is definitely usable. It's just not the best. It's a lot of mods that don't really want to run it every week. In terms of things this team can maybe do better, as I said, it's really just dropping Greedent. I will say though, even if you don't want to go the normal type, because it definitely does have some good ghost checks with Drapion, of course. I would also look into possibly Trapinch. It's a really cool option with Mag. Obviously, being able to clear steals for it is really cool. However, I will say that this team does clear steals phenomenal, so it's not really a necessary option. I just think it's a cool option if you want a fun 20-point mod, and you just want to purely drop Greedent. Otherwise, though, I think this team is pretty cool. Definitely a really cool team. We'll see what happens. Next up, we're going to get into the number 7 team, and that is none other than the Birmingham Weasels. This is the other team without a fairy. However, I think the team definitely does a lot for itself to really shine, and it takes a lot to make a team without a fairy to really, really still stand out. It is 100% a joke to not have a fairy in this format, in my opinion, and I stand by that. The team, however, is so diverse, and it has a lot going for it otherwise that I think really plays into it. This is another team where I think that Sylveon is a really cool pick. And I will say as well that in this format, Shedinja being able to just force Toxic on certain Ubers is a pretty cool option, because there are certain Ubers that just can't touch it. So I think especially with how matchup heavy people assume Ubers is, this will at least relieve some nerves, I think, going into certain matchups. However, I don't think it's personally as matchup heavy as people think. It's really matchup heavy in badly tiered Ubers leagues, and I don't think that the tiers were that bad in this one, to be honest. I think they were pretty good for a non-Ubers cap system. With that said, though, let's get into some things I think that were done really well. I think Rapid Strike Chief is actually a really cool pick on this team. I think the only thing I actually dislike about this team is the Magnezone pick. When you look at this team, what steals need to be trapped? Do you see Reshiram, Annihilate steals? Urshifu, Annihilate Steals, Nidoking, Annihilate Steals. What steals are being trapped in this team and actually being like benefited to the whole draft? I literally can't name you a single one. The biggest instance, I guess, being Corviknight, and it's purely just because there's only Reshiram to handle it, and I guess Mew can definitely pressure it. But like really, I think it was such a wasted pick of a steal. You could probably bump that down to Escav and then go with like just anything else. You could maybe bump up, even if you didn't bump anything. Just I think Escav was an objectively better steal here, and it could be a really cool pick here. However, I would probably personally dedicate that to maybe just getting a better removal option, because Mew will certainly fall into the removal role, in my opinion, if a matchup comes where it definitely needs to, where you definitely need a good removal option. So just having a better removal option, I guess, in the back could be cool if you bump something else to that. Overall, though, this team has a lot going for it. I think the Cleric and Umbreon is really cool here. This team in general benefits a lot from having Umbreon in it, actually, which is really, really nice for it. The Fat Wish is really good for stuff like, for example, actually, this team doesn't really need it for a lot, but I think just having it to wish itself up and then still check opposing ghosts is really cool for Mew. I think off to Mew could actually be a really cool set in this team in a lot of matchups, so I hope it doesn't fall into the predictability of running it every week, because Mew as well is a really solid glue, and I think this team does a good job at really making sure that Mew will never be running the same set every week. I think the biggest crux, actually, if anything, can maybe be putting Mew in a hazard roll every week on this team. So maybe also dropping Magnusum plus another Mon for another hazard setter than just Nidoking and Lycanroc could be cool, because Nidoking loves running just Rocks 3 attacks or even just 4 attacks. And Lycanroc is just kind of a hard Mon to bring in this format just because of how frail it is. Though it is a cool suicide lead, I will say, especially with Endeavor and the fact that it outpaces most Ubers. There's very few that actually that do outpace it. So I think that Lycanroc isn't an awful option, especially with Endeavor. That is definitely a hard Mon to bring, to say the least. This team definitely has a lot going for it. It could be a really cool team. It's just not the greatest. I think that if we go into the number 6 option, though, there's definitely from here a noticeable jump in quality. Again, I think from here to the number 3, here through the number 4 option, I think are all really, really closely ranked. Next up, we go into the San Diego Solrox. So this team actually was pretty similar to the other one. I think this team has a lot going for it in a very similar sense. For example, Naga or Shifu Single Strike. Really, really gross core. Naga's going to be able to kill any fairies that would ever dare touch Urshifu. This is going to be hell to beat, in my opinion. As well as the fact that the removal being Scarm Avalugg is phenomenal. I will say, though, that being so physically defensive leaning is kind of but you have Slowking to actually patch really well in the Spinef end, so I think if that sort of invalidates itself in terms of the criticism I could have offered there. The fairy being Mimikyu is piss poor. Get a better fairy. There's literally Sylveon still. I'm going to recommend that to every fucking team. Whoever gets Sylveon first, a lot of the teams can actually benefit a ton from it. It will fix your season, I promise you. Sylveon would actually, especially, I think this team would benefit the most from Sylveon. Because of the fact that it could obviously be wish support for potential sets. Actually, it wouldn't really need wish support, to be fair, but it could be cool for like a Lecky, which I think a Lecky also is a really cool option on this team. Being able to kill birds for Urshifu is awesome. Also being able to kill potential options for, let's say, actually that's really it. It doesn't really benefit a ton else, but it's still a cool option nonetheless. I like the dual water in this team, actually. I think dual water's okay. It could be better, to be fair. But I think the fact that Gastron is here and the fact that it is able to really be benefited from stuff like Naga clearing grasses for it helps mitigate that weakness. As well as in terms of opposing waters, Gastron can benefit Slowking from just being walled by them because it can obviously stall out a lot of waters easily. Especially with like a rest talk set could be cool. In general, I give this team half on the Cleric because while Kang is a phenomenal Wish Passer, and I just think it's not as needed. On top of the fact as well, it doesn't have a heal belt user, which I think especially with dual water is a pretty important thing to have. Overall, this team has a lot going for it offensively. I think it's a really deadly offensive team, but I think that the team could have definitely used just a better fairy on it, in my opinion. Otherwise, though, this team's a pretty cool team. It's pretty unconventional, in my opinion, but it has a lot going for it that could definitely make it really stand out. So yeah, also has some really good hazard setters. As I said, Scarm alone just provides a lot of hazards. Though, I will say though, Scarm being the only hazard setter definitely does hurt. I would also probably get a better hazard setter. Maybe just drop like Heat more for even just a 20-point Spiker or a 20-point Rocker. Would fix a lot of issues. Could definitely see this team making free agents. However, I think it could still at least perform without them. I will say though, the one thing actually I would probably free agent for is while Avalugg is definitely a solid ground switching because of just how monstrously fizz-def it is. Tongue twister myself there. I do think this team should definitely gun towards an actual resist, because the fact that the only switch into grounds like resist or immunity wise is Skarmory, any sort of gravity, arrows, smackdown, etc. Mon can give this team a real run for its money. Now, definitely Avalugg can definitely help a lot with that for sure with its monstrous fizz-def, but it could definitely be worn down pretty easily with stuff like Toxic or even just like knocking out boots and hazard stacking could be cool. So yeah, I do think this team definitely has a lot going for it. It could be a very terrifying team to say the least, though I think it could definitely be a bit better personally. And with that though, we're gonna get into the final 5. So the final 5, actually, we don't even need to change drop down for this. It's the Alberta Tyrantrums. Now, this team actually, on paper, when I looked at it at first glance, I actually did not like it. However, when I really broke it down, I realized it's actually a really strong team. Pheromosa is a really cool Uber in this format. While I don't think it was the best Uber with what was left, I will say that it was one of the better Ubers just on the board. There were better options though left just as a whole, like as a blanket statement. There were better options. It's an objective fact. There was Zekrom left. There was Dawnwings left. There was Rayquaza left. So there were even Lugia was also left. So there were just objectively better options left. But I do think that this team definitely benefits a lot from Pheromosa, actually. For example, Pheromosa is a phenomenal steel killer for Lele. And in tandem with Mamoswine, actually, Mamoswine being able to annihilate birds for it as well as Raikou, this team synergy-wise actually synergizes really well. My only real gripes from this team, honestly, just come from the fact that the removal is kind of okay. I don't see Pheromosa running removal a lot in this format, though it's not awful. Mantine's those pretty much only real removal on this team. Otherwise, though, the team has a bit of weaknesses. Not anything, like, game-breaking for it, in my opinion. But just the fact that it has a bit of a ground weakness is going to hurt. Though this team can, again, offensively pressure grounds really well, so it's not a huge deal. It's really strong breakers on both ends and cleaners. Really, really diverse in offense, too, especially with the fact that Pheromosa can run physical or special pretty viably in almost any matchup. It really just depends on personal preference or, like, how team comp goes. Raikou also has a lot of options in this format, in my opinion. Subtoxic is great. Calm Mindsets are really good. Mamoswine has a lot of options. Lele has a lot of options. Just don't fall into the Spectre Scarf roll every week, and you'll be fine, because Calm Mind is really deadly as well. Incineroar can provide a ton for this team as well. Metagross can provide a lot. Even Gourgeist has some okay-ish versatility, though probably not a lot, to be honest. This team definitely has a lot going for it, though, in my opinion. Definitely a lot that can come. I would argue every one of the team is a viable pick. Really, I would also say this is actually the first team that I would not recommend free agents to. I think this team as is fine. I would not recommend free agents to it. Unless if you really want to get a better Uber, which, while I don't think that this team needs a better Uber, I will say that there are better ones left on the board. But I don't think you really need it. This is the first team I think that truly should not take a look at the free agent board. And while, as I said, I didn't recommend free agents to a lot of the teams or like specific options to a lot of the teams, I think that every team below this could definitely benefit from looking at the free agent board. And there are 2 above this as well that I think could as well. I think the only reason that didn't put me from putting this higher is either just because the fact that Pheromosa is the Uber, and while it's not a bad pick, I could not, in good conscience, put it higher, knowing that there are teams with really standout Ubers, or at least other things that, in my opinion, push them above synergy-wise. With that said, we're going to get to number 4, which number 4 is none other than the Garland Rowlets. As I mentioned, there were better Ubers, this being the best one allowed, in my opinion, because Veltal was banned. This was, in my opinion, the best Uber allowed, and this team did not disappoint, actually. This did a lot really, really well. For example, I love the fact that this team has a really, really strong option for just supporting in terms of removal with stuff like Silvally, for example. Articuno Galar is an okay removal option, though I will say there are options to maybe free agent that for. In terms of as well, really good momentum, this team has some solid momentum with Silvally, especially with Parting Shot. Coco is great momentum. Swampert is great momentum. Articuno, but again, drop it, please, I beg you. Reboot is even cool momentum. On top of it as well, the hazard setters are okay. It's really just Swampert, but again, free agents could really easily fix this team, like, pretty effortlessly. In fact, I am almost certain that I actually mapped out a free agent plan for you, being dropping Hakamo and Articuno Galar for Volibee and Hitmonlee, because it was that easy to fix this team. While it doesn't fix the hazard issue, it does give a lot more viable removal, even though the team does have some good removal nonetheless. As well as it gives the team a Dark type, which, in my opinion, would be the biggest flaw of this team, especially with a Lunala being 4 times weak to Ghost. The Dark type is Silvally, which, to be fair, Silvally at least does help a bit with that issue, but it does definitely hurt a bit. Also, making sure that Lunala can definitely pressure Psychics definitely does help a lot. However, it is really the only Psychic pressure on this team outside of Silvally, so that does definitely hurt. No Cleric on this team definitely does hurt a bit, or at least no strong Cleric on this team. Maybe Articuno gets something that I'm not remembering, but as far as I'm aware, there's no Cleric on this team. Really strong breakers and cleaners, phenomenal breakers. The team is very diverse as well. Lunala has a ton of options going with it, as well as Coco, and even Kartana has some cool options. Mostly just like SD, Scarf, Band, to be fair, but that's enough for Kartana. Silvally is a very diverse Pokemon just in merit. Pert is a very diverse Pokemon. Regidrago even has some cool options like Specs, Life Orb, etc. It's bulky enough as well, maybe run like a Berry to lure stuff. Reboot as well, again, just diverse in coverage, not necessarily in options, but pretty much everything the team can come. I just don't like Articuno on the team. That literally would, in my opinion, fix everything with this team, just as the dropping Hakamo and Articuno Gallery for Volo be Hitmonlee. Hitmonlee as well is a really cool fighting type, because not only does it provide a spinner for this team, which it doesn't have, but as well as the fact that it does provide a nice, immediate, like, really quick response for electric terrain abuse, outside of just maybe, like, Seed Lunala to maybe take hits a bit better with, like, losing item to help with knockoff at least. In general, this is a really standout team for me, in my opinion. I think this is a team that literally, if those reagents were made, this would be a perfect team for me. And while obviously the team still wouldn't have a cleric, to be fair, the team would, in my opinion, have enough to really just thrive in this format. This is a team that could easily win the title. I think it's pretty effortless for this team to do so. So we'll just have to see what happens. Next up, we're going to get into number 3, which is none other than the Wisconsin Whiscash. Or Whiscash. Bleh. This is another team that I think, while I don't personally like it, and I think there are definitely some really notable issues with it, this person definitely knew what they were doing, to say the least. And I don't think this team is bad by any means. I think it's actually a really good team. It's a very weird team, and I think that anyone who looks at it on first glance wouldn't rate this top 3. However, I do think there's a lot going for it. As I mentioned earlier, having a really monstrous spin helps a lot, and Blissey having 135 on top of also the 255 HP is a godsend for it. Especially the Wish support with Xerneas as well is going to be really beneficial here. And not only that, but it actually has 2 Wish options, being Vaporeon. So in case of Blissey is too passive for a matchup, Vaporeon could actually be a solid Wish option. And I do think that while normally I would not necessarily be like gunning for 2 Wish options, I think with Blissey it's a cool thing to have, just because Blissey is certainly too passive for some matchups. However, Blissey in this format is definitely really bringable to a lot. My biggest gripe with this team is definitely the fact that Rockers are Stunfisk and Blissey. That will definitely be very notable in my opinion, especially when Xerneas wants some good hazard options to try and break down teams a little easier. In general, though, Xerneas is deadly, especially with Corviknight and Dragapult. That is a disgusting core off bat. And then when you throw on Blissey, Moltres, Vaporeon, Ditto, and then Stunfisk as well. My only gripes to the team are Sableye, Thwackey, but even then, they're not awful mons. I would really just maybe drop them, or even just something else for something like a little bit of a fighting type, and then like a better dark type than Sableye. Otherwise, though, this team has a lot going for it, in my opinion. It has the makings of a true champion team. As I said, we'll just get a better dark type than Sableye. And I would also get a fighting type. Also a psychic type too. This team really needs a psychic type. I would probably put this on par with the Garland Rowlands personally. While it did point a bit better just because of the fact that it does have a bit more going for it in terms of cleric support at all and less weaknesses. I do think this team definitely, at least I would put on par with it as a general team. This is where the points start. When you get this high up, I get this, put in perspective, I gave the last one a 15, I gave this one a 16 out of 20. So once you get this high up, it definitely gets a bit more blurry what teams and like how much the points and that sort of breaking down of a scale really matter. But I do definitely think that if this team had a bit better hazard options and a better dark and psychic, and also a fighting psychic, it could be really scary. And honestly, I don't think it'll make or break the team anyway. The team certainly has a lot going for it in terms of, for example, Xerneas just being a deadly option. So we'll have to see what happens. Not sure how that 06 happened. Genuinely couldn't tell you. This draft is phenomenal. I just think that the person maybe just had a really bad showing, I guess, week 1. But I think this person could definitely bounce back. Could be a really good team. On to number 2, Colorado Gigaliths. This is a team that I think is actually, again, on paper not the best, but when you break it down, it's really good. For one, I think Leafeon as a grass, while a bad option, at least it has use on this team with Groudon. Still don't recommend it though, but it's not the worst. Especially being a ground resist, that's kind of cool. Groudon is in general a very slept on Uber, so I'm very glad that when I saw the board and I saw options left, I at least saw Groudon go. I will say that Groudon is a phenomenal Uber. Really, really good option. Terrakion as well is really cool with it, and Volcarona under Sun is also really amazing. One of the biggest things I think this team has going for it is the fact that it has really good hazard options on second glance. Groudon is obviously a phenomenal one, but Terrakion able to pressure a lot of options in this, especially for this draft, to actually be a good setting option, to maybe even fake that Groudon isn't the hazard setter, and then potentially go for endgame with Groudon. Could be really cool. No big weaknesses, really strong breakers physically and specially, really strong cleaners on setup options. The team has a very diverse set of what it can and cannot do. The momentum's okay. I will say that while there are a lot of momentum options, stuff like Milotic, Volcarona, Noivern, Comfey, really the only things that I would say comfortably could run it is maybe Milotic, but definitely Noivern. I guess Teleport Chansey as well, but again, can't comfortably run it. I think the biggest standout thing on this draft for me personally would be the fact that it's really just outside of the momentum a really strong team. In my opinion, I think momentum will be the biggest killer to it. purely for the fact that I think that not being able to bring Groudon as easily will definitely hurt a bit. However, overall, this is a really, really good team. There is one team, however, that I think really did everything perfectly. Literally, to put it in perspective, the only area I did not give it a perfect score in was predictability, but I didn't give any team a perfect predictability. I think that personally, saying a team is perfectly predictable is a bit of a false hope, and also the fact that Uber being Marshadow, it's not the most predictable Uber. But that being the St. Louis Battle Hall Leeches. Now, I did mention earlier, actually, there was a team coming up that I think that Veil actually did really well for, and that is this team. I have only ever seen one Veil team in Ubers look better than this one and more appealing, and that being Kelly's BBL Season 2 team that he free agented for and took over for Bill in all the way back in Gen 7, like mid-Gen 7. So to put it in perspective, I do think that there is not a lot of merit for Veil. However, this team does a lot with it. Celesteela becomes an actually potent offensive option in this tier. Especially with Veil, it is a gross offensive option. Rotom Wash is a really cool offensive option in Veil. Marshadow becomes a really terrifying setup option, so it gives a lot of actual viability to set up Marshadow. While it is certainly still a mod that can set up in a lot of matchups, don't twist my words there, it has a lot of good setup opportunity. However, Veil does give that much more to it. The momentum is really cool with Darm, Rotom Wash, and Dragalge, and even Teleport, Claydol, a Parting Shot alone Persian, all really cool. I think it's Sandslash as well. While I don't rate Hail, I think it's actually a really cool spiker on this team. And it does have the Hail if it really does have a good matchup for some reason. So while I don't rate Hail highly either, again, this is a team that I think does provide with it, especially with the Uber being Marshadow. I think that having the cool, like, just fast option for birds is actually not bad. And Rapid Spin support could actually make it faster to where its Piss Poor 65 speed could actually become really threatening. Also the fact that it's not only resist to dragons, but also a really good dragon killer. So again, this is one of the few exceptions where I think the Hail actually does provide something to a draft, and it's legitimately useful, especially in terms of Ubers, let alone in standard draft. There's whole other cases for that. Darmanitan being a really cool momentum option and a really good speed option for this team. Really solid physical breaker if Marshadow wants to go the setup route. The Bulk is really, really nice with options like Miltank being phenomenal wish support for Rotom Wash and Celesteela. Also the fact that we have options like with hazards from Claydol, Miltank, Sandslash, a lot of that has hazards, even Dragalge just T-Spikes, which is really cool for if the team wanted to go a more defensive route with something like a Subseed Selly, which certainly can wall a lot of the format. So in my opinion, there is no team that currently rivals this one. If this team somehow doesn't win the league, I think it's because the player is legitimately awful. Nothing on the person using the team. I'm certain that they're going to win the league. I'm shocked that they even have an 0-1 on their schedule. They're going undefeated the rest of the season, though. I can feel pretty confident in saying that. This team is the team to watch out for, in my opinion. With that said, that is the end of this video. Hopefully you guys learned something, and hopefully you guys did enjoy. For anyone in the league, let me know down below if there is something I might have missed about your team or maybe overlooked. Also, let me know if you end up taking any advice that I give on your teams. I would love to hear it. I always love hearing teams, like, saying that they were able to learn something from my videos, of course, or even just from my suggestions, because I do offer a lot of suggestions to people in terms of Uber's draft. If you guys did enjoy it and you were not in the league, of course, as I said, leave a like down below, comment, subscribe. Let me know your favorite draft down below, or even your personal power rankings. I would love to read them and discuss. With that said, though, it's been Liv, and I'm signing out. Until then, peace out, guys. Bye.